You are about to witness the very exciting story of a city and its people. It is a story of a city, seeking new horizons in a resolute contest with great challenges. That city is Detroit. Here's a focal point for the multiracial strains that compose so much of Detroit's population.
Some say it was a riot, others a rebellion or an uprising. But whatever your point of view, the events that transpired in the summer of 1967 were pivotal in the city's history. There were riots in 59 American cities. The worst of them, Detroit. The symposium, Detroit Then and Now, was an outgrowth of the play Palmer Park, written by Joanna McClellan Glass. The play focuses on two families, one white, one black, who were neighbors in Detroit in the years after the deadly summer of 1967. They are forced to adjust to a new way of life that is filled with more questions than answers. Detroit Then and Now offers a broad perspective of the troubling past, the complicated present, and the city's dynamics of the future.
Why is the issue of race so difficult to talk about? We talk about cancer, we talk about the economy, we talk about our sex lives. Why is this issue so uncomfortable to explore? And is that the reason that it's still right here in front of us?
I always hear people saying, well, young people really don't have the issue. That is not true. Last year we did a seminar and we worked with young people over the summer for them to build this seminar. From young people from all around the region, from all different backgrounds, all races. We asked them, you choose your title. And the title that they chose was Racism on the Down Low, Hidden Racism. And they talked to us about how their parents say one thing and do another. Case in point, young African-American woman said, she's like a teenager, so I'll say young, she wanted to be a young African-American woman, 16 years old, her family moved from Detroit to Farmington Hills. Went to school, brother started dating a white girl. The mother was totally upset with the fact that it happened. And they were like, well, she was like, well, Mom and Dad, this is what you said to me. You said it's okay, you know, we moved here, what'd you expect? But again, my parents say one thing and do another. And it works the other way. Asian kids, Arabic kids, these are the kinds of conversations that we have. And what they say to us, again, is we don't know how to approach our parents. Oftentimes, we don't know how to approach each other to have these kinds of conversations. So,
a couple of Michiganians, Morley Winograd and Mike Hayes, did a book last year called The Millennials. They did a huge amount of polling of that generation between the ages of 8 and 28. It's a bigger generation than the boomers. 40% are non-white, 20% are immigrants or the children of immigrants. And when you poll them on questions of race, gender, sexual orientation, they literally don't know what the question is. If you ask them about interracial marriage, they say, yeah, what? And if you say, well, no, what I'm asking is whether you approve of it, it ought to be acceptable, you have any problems with it, 95% say, of course not. And that includes white, late teens and early 20s from the South as well. So on one hand, so much of what we were fighting about then, I think generationally, is changing dramatically. But what is, I think, most optimistic and encouraging is between generations is when revolution really occurs.
There is that optimism about the millennials, certainly, and this whole idea of color blindness. But just a few more data points. I mean, when we look at this region, we think about it today. Just since 1970, the region, and I'm just talking 3 counties, the region has essentially lost 280,000 people. But what we've done is we've taken 730,000 people out of the city of Detroit and moved a certain number, you know, some of them left, obviously, but if we take that 730,000 out of Detroit, we throw 450,000 out to the outlying suburbs, and we create this racially segregated area. And what we're finding not only is the racial segregation, as we're trying to talk about how does this region come up with a regional vision, how do we look at the Obama administration and they're coming out with issues around Detroit has to have a vision, the region has to have a vision. We're looking at a region that is the most socioeconomically segregated. So you look at city versus suburbs, you look at school district against school district, you look at issues of educational attainment, you look at one factor after another, you look at employment. We're at a very critical time, I think, that the city of Detroit is getting a lot of focus. In fact, the entire world is kind of looking at Detroit. Every urban planner in the world wants to come and make a name for themselves in Detroit. Everybody has their own design for either a farm or some new structure or something in Detroit. And there is, if you're aware of it, if you're out there, there is a suspicion, there's fear in the community that somebody in the suburbs is making decisions and the city residents are not part of that decision-making process. Certainly millennials will come into the city. There's a lot of emphasis on building Midtown. But we're talking about neighborhoods. How do we restructure the neighborhoods? How do we get people literacy skills? How do we get people the skills to get jobs? How do we get jobs to people? And I think there's a lot of issues that we need to be thinking about as we look for the future of this region, the future of this city.
I wonder whether or not there's a bigger issue with classism as there is with racism.
In our schools, which are in the city of Detroit, we encounter that in an interesting way. All of our students are African American. And there's always some push-pull between parents who bring, I think, more middle-class values to our schools and students who come from very poor homes with different values about how to reconcile that and can I keep my kids here. And again, I think to kind of conclude with an optimistic note, I think what a number of schools in urban areas across the United States are learning is that you can create school cultures that are so powerful that you can aspire to take children from a variety of backgrounds and build their school culture, which really is those behaviors that support success, college, business professions, that whole path. So while those are very real problems that were cited, and some of them obviously continue in different ways, my sense is that we're better prepared than we ever have been, particularly with this new generation emerging, to tackle them successfully.
I just want to ask this question, and then I want to open it up, and that is, in general conversation in the news, and we say people of all kinds, white, blacks, Asians, blah, and it seems to me that the magic ingredient when we have this conversation is white. Why is it that white seems to be the necessary ingredient to make something okay?
The white majority has carved out for itself a variety of images, and the myth of white superiority pervades. And so whites make sure that we take care of ourselves. To get to some of your questions about race and class, Fair Housing Center, we do testing. We send out people posing as home seekers to see if there's difference in treatment accorded to people because of their race or religion, national origin. And there have been national studies that have done the same thing. And what we have found is that it doesn't matter whether we're testing for housing for lower income peoples or for higher upper income people, we're getting the same levels of differences in treatment at all income levels. So the issue of whether whites are treating upper income blacks better than lower income blacks, we don't find strong evidence to support that. We find that the discrimination occurs at all levels. What we do find is that there's a tendency on the part of a lot of white folks to ignore the fact that over 60–70% of African Americans are not poor. They're middle and upper middle class people who can afford to live anywhere that white folks can live.
What a great conversation we've chosen to have today. So what I'd like to do is invite anyone up who may have a question for our panel.
what do you think the transportation mode, or our form of transportation, how much has that contributed to the demise of Detroit?
The only way we're going to really be able to grow and become the kind of region we need to be is to have transit. And the policy issues that have held up rapid transit in this region are unbelievable. And I continue to be in meetings with folks talking about the ability to opt out. And so we need to begin to focus on, we have the power, we elect individuals, we have the power to make our voices known when these kinds of issues come up.
Just a few comments on transportation, because I think that when people talk about the future of Detroit and how Detroit's going to come back both as a city and as a region, it's transportation that is really the driving factor. Just a number of different issues. One of the things is we're the largest metropolitan area without a rapid transit system. We have 2 bus systems that less than function well. They certainly don't function together. We have certainly, in terms of, we've talked about the population sprawl, we actually sprawl more in jobs than any other region in the country. We create more jobs 10 miles or more from the center of our city. So all our decision making is to these edges. And it would be great if we had a public transportation system that allowed you to live in Detroit and get to those jobs. That would make it much easier. Or if you had a suburban transportation system that didn't allow you to opt out. I think what's happening is if you look at, and these are studies with kids around the country, and you ask them to kind of draw their neighborhood, draw their world. Their worldview in Detroit, because of transportation, is so small. There is no, I mean, we purposely, we live separately, but the fact that transportation doesn't allow us to move readily between communities, we don't intermix. And so the transportation system just really pushes that segregation, just kind of re-emphasizes the segregation, plus it just breaks, it just kind of separates people in terms of the jobs, in terms of this region working as one. So I think transportation across the board is probably the biggest issue we need to tackle, and it's one of those policies that will really ripple down and have quite a much more positive effects.
So basically, by not having public transportation and having communities that are able to opt out, we don't have an opportunity to experience other neighborhoods, and other neighborhoods don't have an opportunity to truly experience Detroit.
I would like you to address the problem of behavior among some of the young people, not all of them.
I think the key is not to conclude that you can't educate poor children well until we fix all of the social issues and challenges they face. Otherwise, we're all off the hook. It is up to a school to create a culture, teach a set of behaviors that would allow much more than half the schools, to the gentleman who just presented, half the students to be able to take advantage of your being there. And the good news is, while it's not easy, it's doable. So that's the hopeful part.
Do you think, as some people have said to me, people talk and talk and talk, but nothing happens? Do you think that these discussions will help us to move to a better place in our society?
Great question.
Absolutely. I mean, you heard me talk about the fact that we've been doing this for 7 years, and when people ask me the difference between folks in terms of those who have sort of gotten rid of some of that fear in having conversations, it's because they actually have the conversations. And I always say that talking is doing something. Because people say, I don't want to talk, I just want to do something. That's doing something. And I think perhaps some of the decisions that we make in this community or any other would be much better if we had taken the time to have the conversations up front. We don't seem to do that. And so this today is really, really important. The more you have of these, the better, because you hear the different voices. And it's really important to hear different voices coming together, and then we get to hear that and move in a direction. So I absolutely applaud this setting today, absolutely.
Talking is clearly part of it, along with people's experiences. But I think if you look at the place of African Americans in this society, the role of women in this society, issues of sexual orientation in this society, now and 50 years ago, it's a revolution. Is it all done? Do women still make quite the same as men?